Hello and welcome to the podcast series, A Burden for the Times, a conversation on culture and race. I'm your host, Adrian Burden, and I'm with my brothers, Aaron and Anton, to tackle some crucial topics in order to have some clarifying conversations about race. Hello and welcome to the special version of the podcast during Black History Month of 2021. We're going to answer this question. Do we need a Black History Month? Well, right before we jump into the content of the episode, we're going to go ahead and do our lightning round question that for you to get to know a little bit more about us. Today's a little bit more of a dramatic question. Some would even say much hyperbole, but it gets the point across that I'm curious about. We're going to do backwards order. Usually start with Aaron, but this time we'll start with Anton. What's the question is this? If you were on death row, hopefully you don't end up there one day, but if you were on death row and you had your final meal that they're going to bring to you, what would that final meal be? Anton, start with you.
I'm going to say ribs, some corn on the cob, and it doesn't really go, but probably some sweet potato casserole.
Sweet potato. Are there any specifics of who makes these things? Is there any restaurant that's out there that has your name on it?
But I do want Jardine sweet potato casserole.
That's our aunt, by the way.
Sorry, yes. And they got to have some ribs going on and stuff. So, all right. Any other specifics or desserts or anything like that? Or you're going to pass for dessert? Don't want to watch that weight before you get electrocuted. I don't know.
Dessert? That's tough. It'd probably be banana pudding. Yeah,
okay.
Get some banana pudding. There's one more on that.
All right, then I'll go next because if I have a list of top 10 restaurants that are my favorite in the country, but if I had to narrow it down, somebody had to go to Amish country and go up there and get me some of that fried chicken, but it's done broasted. It's a very hard to explain, but it's just amazing. That and some macaroni and macaroni and cheese. You got to get me some of that chicken, and then have some good old tea, and probably a Cheesecake Factory cheesecake, Snicker flavor, because I'm not going to be watching any calories or anything like that. Or there's a lot of other restaurants. Maybe go to Paris and get me a macaron before I die, maybe a Nutella flavored one. And so there's a couple of options I would have on the tables. But
if we can travel.
Maybe anywhere in the country. Well,
exactly, right? Exactly.
I'm on death row, but I need to stop by France real quick.
Well, I'm going to send one of my boys over there and get it for me so I can have it right until I get done. All right, Aaron, what's yours? What's your meal?
This is hard, but I guess if you just asked me straight up, yes, exactly. Right on top of my head, we're going for a Ruby Tuesdays triple prime burger.
Oh my goodness!
With some fries and a sweet tea.
A small worldview, a very small worldview. But I'm sure Ruby Tuesdays appreciates the shout out for their triple prime burger. My goodness, there's a couple other burgers out there that might be able to do it. The best burger I've ever had in my life is actually in Columbia, Missouri, at Asaki. It's a restaurant, and it's just goat cheese. It was amazing. But anyway, we can talk about food. We can talk about it another day. But anyway, those are the final meals, just so you get to know a little bit about us and I guess even our culinary likes and dislikes. Anyway, as we jump into this podcast, what we're going to do is a little bit something different this month. We're going to put out a podcast every Friday of February in honor especially of Black History Month. They're going to answer a couple of questions about it in just a moment, but just so we get a background of what's going on, Black History Month, historically, it came from a guy by the name of Dr. Carter Woodson. He was a Harvard grad, and basically he was very much just noticing a lot of the accomplishments that were happening in the Black community. In fact, I think he wrote, "The Negro has been educated. He has been merely informed about other things which he is not permitted to do." Basically, what he was pointing out is whenever we hear about Black people, Negro is a more common word during that time, but we hear all you do is basically hear about what we can't do, what they're not able to achieve, the problems and stuff they're causing. It seems that during a great time where there should have been advancements and the Jim Crow laws and stuff, we're only hearing about just limitations. So let's just take the time. He started off with just what's called the Negro History Week. Basically, it was a week to observe and celebrate Black literature, Black history, and different things. And so he went ahead and he coincided the week with Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln because of their significant roles in the abolitionist movement. And so basically, he took that time frame, and he convinced the fraternity that he was a part of back at Harvard to just take a week and honor the accomplishments of Black individuals. Well, it kind of hit off, and even though he died in 1950, later on, 25 years later, President Gerald Ford was the one who acknowledged that we should take this week, and basically it turned into what we now know as Black History Month. And so during this time in February, a lot of times some people look at it and kind of, just it's another month that somebody else is adding something to the calendar. Some people really understand the significance and try to really just kind of promote what was intended at the beginning. So here's what we're going to do. As we begin, we have 3 questions that we're going to kind of think through. And the last question is going to be really unpacking about what exactly Black History Month is about. So we're going to start with you, Aaron. In your head, how do you see this? Some people have stereotypes of Black History Month, already have preconceived ideas, whether it's be dismissive ideas or if it be ideas that glorify it beyond where it should be as well. I don't know what exactly realm you might go at it at, but in your mind, what do you hear? What do you think of that people have told you stereotypes about Black History Month?
I think one of the main ones is that for some reason, Black History Month is a time where we just roast white people. Like it's just like, oh man, let's just go back and tear apart white people and what they did. I mean, can we say that there were some difficult things that happened in the past? Yes, there's some difficult things, but that's not the highlight of the month. It's not the celebration. It would almost be like when the children of Israel had, and this is not a one-to-one comparison, right? But like the Passover about leaving Egypt and looking back on Egypt. And the whole thing for the Passover is not to slam Egypt. It was to celebrate what God did for the children of Israel. And so the excitement of leaving Egypt and living a new life, knowing freedom now is an exciting thing. So we have these exciting moments that sometimes get overshadowed because everyone kind of looks at it as like, oh, well, you're just hating on white people. But I think there can be many others, but that's the one that comes to my head.
Anton, what do you think? I think that's a great illustration that you use, especially about the children of Israel and kind of having that time of remembrance. Remembrance is important. So, Anton, any stereotypes that you hear?
Yeah, I would agree with Aaron. I would say the 2 that are most common are either that it's to bash white people or that it is something that is, I don't want to say a solution, but for me, I guess the concept of Black History Month is not a solution. It's a Band-Aid until we come to the proper solution. Because realistically, I'm not going to say I dislike Black History Month, but I think that it comes across, at least to me personally, somewhat as tokenism because it doesn't actually intend or plan to solve a problem. It's to highlight Black history in a month instead of just highlighting it all year, which is kind of what should be the ultimate goal. So I think people usually fall on one side or the other. Either it shouldn't exist at all or that it is a solution. And I don't think Black History Month was ever supposed to be either of those 2 things.
So you say that sometimes people just make it as a token. Is that what you're pretty much saying? Because basically what that means is they're just going through the motions to say, hey, I like Black people, whatever it be. And you think that's not part of the solution at all?
Oh, I do. I mean, that's exactly what I'm saying. Because, I mean, I think if you highlight social media right now, there are a lot of companies that have not cared about Black history all year. They didn't care about it last year, but they're going to care for the next 28 days, and you won't hear about it again. That'll be the only time we bring up the one Black guy who works in their business department will be on a commercial. It'll be this month. Right. We will not hear his name again. No one will care. And to me, yeah, I think it's part of the problem. Black History Month is not, it's not a solve. It's helpful, but it's definitely not a solve.
Well, I think that's interesting. And when we get to the part of the podcast of what do we believe Black History Month is supposed to accomplish. I'm looking forward, Anton, to be able to hear you unpacking a lot about those things as well. I would say for me, some of the stereotypes that I would hear most commonly for me is, why is there not White History Month? Why are you now putting yourself in a different category? We should all be one. We should be united. Why is it that now that you're segregating yourself off? I thought that was the past. How come we can't? And on the list goes about why. When I think of any type of memorial or some type of honoring that happens within a community, as Aaron kind of pointed out, it's not necessarily to degrade the other communities that are out there. When we celebrate Memorial Day, it doesn't degrade the fact of those who are veterans. Veterans Day doesn't degrade the fact, so either we have to go to one or two extremes where, everything has a day, which, in our culture, we're kindly doing that. There's Ice Cream Day, there's Donut Day, there's, your favorite ballpoint pen day and everything else in the world. And so it's like you can kind of go and everyone has the token that you start finding, and people are starting feeling more tokenized and they are appreciated in some of those cases. But I do believe that it's understood that from the original intent of when it began, I think that's where I would like to go. And with Black history, I would say that when the only time I looked on the news and saw that people who looked like me were the only ones in prison, the ones in jail, the ones doing different things, it sure is an encouragement to me as a Black individual to say, wait a second, man. Like if you studied the history books that I looked at, aside from Booker T and George Washington Carver, I thought we were a bunch of knuckleheads, man. I mean, we didn't really have it going together. We had a couple of guys out there that kind of did a couple of things, but there, to come to find out that there is many statesmen, there were many people who had great things to say, even theologians, Black theologians that did great work and study of the Bible, but you think I have not been introduced to them. And a lot of times when people are asked the question, why is there White History Month? I think Emmanuel Acho, in his recent said, because why is there not a White History Month? When he was asked, he pretty much was saying because White History Month happens every other day of the year. And I wouldn't say it like that. I think I do know where he is coming from. But I think for those, it would be it's kind of a hard path to be able to make people sometimes, acknowledge that would be a reality. But I would say when you study history, I think you realize that most of the people who penned the history that we are reading right now did not look like me as a Black man. And so I think the impression that's trying to be given is the fact that there are many people who feel a little bit kind of pushed aside in history because they haven't really had their say. Because I believe if Black history, if there's a lot of Black historians that we were reading after, that not that history itself would be totally changed, but it'd be seen in a way different perspective than what we see now. Hence, I think it's important for us to be able to look at those historians and different people to be able to get their viewpoint. Anybody want to add anything to some of those stereotypes that we see about Black history? There's no way that we can unpack them all, but are there any other ones that come to mind, guys?
Yeah, I'll just add to really quickly what you were saying about why not a White History Month. And we can be a little silly with it, but if we were to have a question like, who was the first white president? Or we're having a quiz notice like, who was the first white football coach, or who was the first white, like we can make jokes about it because it wasn't history making. It didn't.
That's called the news, as Emmanuel Acho said. That's called the news.
Exactly. So we have nothing like the highlight. And the only thing is, and I agree with Anton when he's saying that Black History Month hopefully should something that as we learn these things, they kind of fade away. But if we did ask for a lot of people who was the first Black fill in the blank, a lot of times we're just going to stand around and like, let me Google that real quick. Or even like right now, sometimes we have this conversation in the church world, right? If somebody says name 5 in our circle, right? Independent Baptist or whatnot, like name 5 Independent Baptist Black pastors. And it's like, Kenny Baldwin. And then it's like, I follow this other guy on Twitter.
And like, Kenny Baldwin has a dad, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And so when you start looking at it, like there are some things that need to be highlighted. Now, when you get to a point like you said with Ice Cream Sunday Day, and when everything's highlighted, nothing's highlighted. Like exactly. Pretty much when everything is.
Yeah, Anton, do you have anything else to add?
I was going to add, when you're talking about someone saying a White History Month. I think much like there is a Native American History Month, you can't take history out of it. I know nobody wants to say it, but again, slavery and Jim Crow are the reason these things existed.
Yeah.
Like, you can't separate, in my opinion, the month. And that's why, again, I do feel at times the month feels tokenized, is because sometimes we try to take the bitter history out, because Aaron did a great job. And again, I don't disagree with you, but I think it does lack context whenever you try to have the conversation about there is an element that will make other people feel bad. I think that's inevitable. I don't think you can have an honest conversation about Black History Month and not make people feel bad, which I think, again, has become the marketing goal of most major corporations, which is why I say that it's a problem for me and becomes tokenism, because Black History Month exists primarily because of the horrible history Black America has had. Native American History Month exists because of the horrible way they were treated. You can't really have a discussion about Black History Month. And that's why when someone says White History Month, that's the primary reason I don't feel it makes sense. Because you wrote the book. You had all the advantages that come with that. They didn't. To me, it's similar to the affirmative action statements, that it's like there's an obvious reason. And I think when we lose that reason because people don't want to make other people feel bad, the conversation becomes redundant. Because, of course, it's different to be Black in this country. That's why my month is different and you don't have a month. Because for literally 100 years, I had nothing. Yeah. You had everything. So I get 1 month. That's it. And if that's so high that it makes you upset, think about that for a moment. That doesn't make any sense. And I feel the same way about, again, like I said, other groups who do have months or do have, if you want to call them now, social advantage, which is, again, a stretch. But if you want to say that, there's a reason. There's a very long reason, documented reason. It's not like this came out of nowhere. And because that's why I feel it's disingenuous to be like, why is there a Black History Month? Of course, like, again, what's the difference between Black history in the United States and white history in the United States? And to me, you can't have that discussion until that one precedes it. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, and I don't want to be prejudging, because prejudging is prejudice. And so at the risk of sounding that way, I do want to say something concerning that. A question that some people are having and kind of screaming at the podcast right now is, why are you trying to separate it? Isn't the goal then that we all want to be joined together? So why on earth are you now trying to segregate yourself off? And even though I know that question, obviously I couldn't hear it through anybody yelling at their stereo of them saying that. But the thing is, I think that sometimes we want to flip flop and be able to say, like, during all the years when we should have been all one and we should all been together, those have been the years for me to be able to say we all are one. We are in one blood. That would be the great time for that book. And that would be the great time for people in churches to believe in that. However, now when we start talking about looking at individual histories and different things, we got to be able to embrace the reality that this did happen. And Anton, you brought up a good point about some histories make us uncomfortable. Memorial Day makes people uncomfortable because you got to think about the fact that it's not free. What you have right now is not just for everybody in the world. You are privileged. You are blessed because of veterans. And so I think there's a little bit of uncomfortableness that comes with any type of honoring of that which happened in the past, because typically in our world, Remembrance Day, September 11th, it wasn't a happy day. Okay. Nobody wants to repeat that day, but it's part of our history and we then are remembering it. So let me just go to this. So we talk about stereotypes of Black history. So obviously, we have a podcast in 2021 starting at the end of 2020. So February of 2020, what would you say, Aaron, is the biggest difference between Black History Month in 2020 and Black History Month of 2021?
I guess, and I still nod toward what Anton says, that like hopefully Black History Month is something we don't need. But I think after living through 2020, I think we need it more than ever. So when you hear people talk about why are people mad about something that happened hundreds of years ago in slavery, and you need Black history to show you that, like, literally people may be upset about slavery, but there's so many other things that have happened since emancipation that we have to worry about, that you obviously don't know the history if you think we're just mad because of slavery, or people are still doing these things because of slavery. Nobody here today owns slaves. But when, like our last podcast about police brutality, when we know that I am 37 years old and I've been pulled over by the police or treated certain ways, Adrian, you have stories, Anton, you have stories of things that happened today. Like, we started to see that by studying the history, we're starting to put the pieces together that this problem hasn't gone away. And so I think that's the big difference between 2020 and 2021 is kind of open our eyes to a lot of these things. And then I would go one step further and say 2020 into 2021 has opened my eyes on how much I was missing and how much I didn't know. And then the books that I'm reading now have helped me grow. And so this isn't even necessarily about, well, let's do this to educate quote unquote white people. This is, man, I want to grow in my knowledge of what African Americans who've gone before us have done. So I think that would be my big one.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think as you were kind of reviewing history, people are, speaking about not only slave hundreds and different years ago. The reality is we don't live in centuries. We live in decades. And since we live only in decades, then that means we got to start thinking to ourselves what happened 40, 50 years ago. And there's been a lot of uncool history that is taking place in the Black community, and the thing is, because of those reasons and all those different things that are happening in our lifetime and thing is, what are we going to do? How will we write our chapter? I think, Aaron, you alluded to during one of the past podcasts, we want to make sure that the opportunities and the decades that we are given, that we are making sure that we're rolling the ball in the right direction. Anton, and you, 2020 to 2021, is there a difference, or how do you see yourself?
I agree with Aaron in that's, if I were going to find a difference, it's learning all the things you didn't know and taking a new look at history. But you brought up living in decades. And I do think which again, this is, I guess, me being cynical, but what has changed in the decade, I think, is that it's become the woke thing to be part of Black History Month. When it used to be like, I'm going to say, like, when I was growing up, it was, you saw it on PBS, you saw some commercials, but it wasn't a thing. But now it's like everyone is on the Black History Month. Did you know this lady? Did you know? And I care about her more than anyone else. She's my personal hero, the person you've never talked about in your life until today.
That I Googled 5 seconds ago.
Exactly.
And found this Creative Commons image to share.
And I think that's what's changed. And
okay, but let me push back. Because is it a bad thing because it's popular? Is it a bad thing because it's hit mainstream media? It's almost like we start a podcast to be able to create awareness. Let's just say our mission is successful and everybody is aware. So does that mean now we're a failure because it's the popular thing to do now?
No, not of course. Of course not. I think that's the difference again between people who use Black people as tokens and people who care. Like, I'm just saying there's no evidence that anyone cares. There's just evidence that is trending on Twitter. Those are two completely different things. And so, like, if this person does that, and that's why I said the goal to me of Black History Month is that happens all year. That she's posting that image in July, doesn't have to hashtag it for her friends. And to me, that's not where we are. We are in a place where it is currently cool to say Black Lives Matter and then not care about them for the rest of the year. And I don't think it's helpful because, in my opinion, it comes across as a cathartic release that makes people feel better without making any actual changes. And I'm not for it.
Well, 2021 and 2020 are polar opposites for me because I would say I have also changed personally. But one thing that I have become just laser focused, just pursuing with all that I have is that my two girls will not be ignorant of Black history. You talk about turning up the Black voices. My kids now, man, I am in a position where it's like, when they study history, I'm looking at what they're studying. I'm making sure that you're reading these books concerning Black history. We're watching movies about Black history. And some people might even say it's overboard. I want them to have a full understanding, the good, the bad, the ugly. I want them to hear their dad quote people who are authorities on scripture that are also Black. I want them to be around and hear other voices that, because you can call it, it is intentionality, I would say. And some would even say it's just you're only almost creating your own separate bias. But I am still trying to navigate this idea of being able to become an adult in America and be able to not be able to name any type of person who is a Bible believing Christian who has great things to say that's in the African American community. And for me, I would say to 2020 Adrian and 2021 Adrian has really focused in on my family and focus in on my kids so that I don't want them to be ignorant of some of these great accomplishments. And so, yeah, Black History Month is definitely a highlight. I guess this is when we kind of, with permission, go crazy on it. And yeah, you need to read that again. And yeah, right now we're going to be listening to Martin Luther King's speech or whatever it is. Like, we are going to be doing these things more so, but throughout the year, this is something that I find that this is a reality, going forward for our family. So those are the differences, I would say. So let's get to the crux of this.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
Just want to add one more thing of bringing the last two conversations together. So with this conversation of us like talking how we see the need for this month and like awareness for us, like, hey, what do we learn? What do we do? Compared to why not have a White History Month? And I think when we start this out, we ask, why are we segregating ourselves? Why are we putting ourselves separate? What if we're not separating ourselves? What if we're just putting ourselves in the story that we've been told for so long?
Oh, my
So now we're just filling in the blanks of all the places that we did not know. So like, we're not separating Black people out. We're looking at how Jackie Robinson fits into this picture or how so-and-so fits into this overall narrative of history. And this is the month that we get to like keep painting those extra people into this history that we've been taught for so long. And I think that's why this is valuable.
Wow, I would like to take credit for that quote you just made right there, because that's my heart right there. Paint the people back into history that were left out of history. Paint them into it. Anton, do you have any pushback from that? I'm honestly curious. I'm putting you on the spot.
I do, but I was going to let it go.
Bring it. Go ahead.
Bring it. This is all right. We're getting a bit into the podcast, but go for it. We'll do the last section quickly. I want to hear.
I think you said it in the artistic, very friendly way. And I think it's very important to note the fact that in the picture we've painted is not right. That's what I hope Black History Month fixes, is because to me, you brought up Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson, like when you first read it, what would you say Jackie Robinson's biggest accomplishment is?
African American baseball player, first Negro African American baseball player inside the league.
Professional, yeah.
Okay. See, when you say it like that, that implies, what would you say that implies to me?
That there were no other Black people playing baseball.
Yes, it does imply that. It also implies to me that he was the first one good enough. Blackie Robinson, a better example would be Jackie Robinson was the first Major League Baseball player white people let play with him.
Yes.
That's what happened. There were a lot of Black people who were better than Jackie Robinson.
Well, wouldn't it be Satchel Paige? Am I thinking right?
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, Satchel's a great example of that.
I would say Satchel Paige would have been. Yeah,
there's a million. But I'm saying, like, to me,
but we can't cherry pick who history remembers, though. In that case, he was the one that was able to battle through and live through the segregation. So no hate to Jackie for doing that, right?
I'm not hating on Jackie Robinson at all. I'm hating on the narrative.
History narrative. Yes,
that the narrative is wrong. So when you paint Jackie Robinson into the narrative, he becomes, again, in my opinion, a token instead of what he was. He was a hero that even the people who hated all other Black people could not find anyone wrong with. That's who he was. He wasn't a guy who just so happened to be okay at baseball and fought through the league. To me, again, that's a narrative issue, which is why at times I think when the Aarons paint everyone in, everyone gets a role, whether or not that is their role or not. And to me, it makes it changes the burden of proof from, in my opinion, the white people who wouldn't let any black people in to Jackie Robinson. You're changing the story to take the dirt off your hands. That's all I'm saying.
But don't we do that in everything, though? Like, honestly,
when they write history,
I'm saying even like when you look at, and I'm not even, because I don't think biblical history is wrong, right? But again, like we'll go back to people in the Bible, Abraham, like history is going to paint Abraham a good way, even though Hagar and Ishmael are never going to see Abraham as the great man that he is, because he literally left him out to die, like with some bread and water, one of the richest men. So like, but I feel like that's not Black history. That's just history in general. And that's what you're saying, right? This is just history in general.
Not really, because
I think this. I'm going to interrupt, and I'm purposely interrupting because I think this is going to be unpacked at a later date when we do the episode about textbooks and about the bias and different things in those areas. And then, am I right to think, Anton, that this would also kind of fall into those lines? Because basically, you're challenging how history is written itself about the way that we see it, and people not being able to think critically and look broadly at all the things that were happening during a historical time. Is that, I mean, that's what you're challenging, right?
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Okay. And since you are, I think this would be unpacked during that episode or during that time in the future. Or do you think that now is the time to look at that?
Oh, no. I think it's an education issue.
Well, wait, education. So I'm curious of the conversation. I did want to push back a little bit because I was just curious. But I do want, since the title of this one is, do we need a Black History Month? Why do you believe Black History Month? What do you believe it's supposed to accomplish? So, Aaron, I know that you recently wrote an article about it, and I know that you probably have much to say concerning it. So I'll let you go ahead, take a little bit of time. You don't have to take too long or whatever. We're going a little bit long right now. Take the time, talk about what you think is supposed to accomplish. And then Anton, I'll let you totally dismantle it after he's done. Okay. Aaron, go ahead.
Well, I guess mainly I'm just going to say, I think it's a time that we need to celebrate. I think there's some good things. Like right now, I'm having such a good time. And you said the same thing with your kids. Like looking at some people's lives that we had not seen so far. And hopefully, like Anton said, and adding what Anton's saying into this, I'm looking at things in the context of the history and learning. So, and like reading the books from the actual people. So last night, me and Aaron were listening, my wife, Erin, we were listening to Rosa Parks and listening to Rosa Parks' reflections and just hearing her spirit and hearing her quote scripture and saying like, these are my favorite scriptures. And this is just like, wow to me. Like, this isn't just a lady who didn't give up her seat on the bus. This is a Christian lady who loves God's word and who's tried to read it every day, trying to live it. And it's all of a sudden opening their eyes. And I think these are things to celebrate. These are the holes I need filled in this just abstract story that I've been told about a lady who just sits on the bus, or as we go through the podcast and we start for the next couple of weeks talking about different people. And so I've been trying to read on people that weren't that aren't the token, right? That aren't on every picture that you're going to see for Black History Month. Yeah. Like learning these people's names and celebrating who they are and what they're doing. And adding to what Anton says, there are moments where we're looking at the hard things, right? The hard things that happened. And even as we talk to mom or whatever, and like you start hearing things that happened when she was growing up. And it's just like, whoa, these things are like filling in the gap of all the things that I thought I knew, or I would have thought I'm an educated individual. And I didn't know these things. And so this is what I think is a moment for us to stop and reflect on those things. And I think it is it is of the utmost that we do it right now in the midst of all this heat and all the things going on. But I guess, again, I'm trying to keep looking at it doesn't have to be a negative. It does point out some negative things, right? It's like sitting in a sermon and hearing truth preached. Like you're hearing truth that maybe you need to change some things and do some things. But hopefully as that truth is preached and you're changing what you need to change and the Holy Spirit's working in your heart, that as you change these things, like it's a good thing overall. Like you're dealing with some hard things. You got to hit them hard, go through it. But it's overall, it's something to celebrate. And maybe that's just my optimistic outlook on life shining through things. But I think there's some good stuff to be had right now in Black History Month. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things, and so I won't go on like a 30-minute monologue on it, but I think that's my main thing, that there's something to celebrate, and I think it is even something to celebrate no matter what your color is. So I feel like the same thing that happens when we talk about Native Americans, when you read Booker T. Washington's Up from Slavery, and he's going to get these Native American kids that nobody wants and trying to educate them. And as he's educating them, he's showing love for them and he feels for their stories. And I think that if all the things that are going on in the African American community, I think if somebody said, hey, we need to think about these Native American kids, Booker T. Washington would have been on the forefront of it. Like, yes, we do need to be right here, educating them, helping them. So I feel like when we start learning these things, it's not to knock anybody down, not to throw people under buses. It's because ultimately we all need to get better. Like, we all need to get better at this.
I agree. And this is a good spot because it almost February gives us a permission to speak on these uncomfortable topics. I remembered when before 2020, whole different things happened, and I would say my inward perspective changed. Is if there was ever a time that I would speak on issues that I felt were racially charged or had that inclination, this was like February is my month to do it. If you go back to my website and different things, and any blog I wrote, anything that I wrote the first article, Black Church, White Church, and different things. It was always during February because I'm like, people can't hate because it's February. This is my permission. I'm okay in this little realm. And so what I find is this is a good time to be able to reflect and be able to go through and like you said, celebrate. And it's okay. It's okay to talk about the uncomfortable during those times. And like you were talking about the Native Americans, I found, even during the Native American month as well, some of the people that we preach to in the church that's really special to us in Wallapai, there in Arizona, it was like we had almost like a connection with them because I don't know, I believe it's like community wise, they felt that the Black community could somewhat feel what they felt as Native Americans in some way. And so we had a really neat inroad for ministry and stuff as we were there in different reservations and stuff. So, but anyways, Anton, what do you think? What do you believe Black History Month is supposed to then be accomplishing?
I think the point of Black History Month is to make real change over time. Like to add the education that everyone gets during this month to year round. And that to me, that's the ultimate goal, which is why I personally, like I told Aaron, I really hope that it doesn't have to exist for any lengthy period of time. Because I think the longer it exists, the more I would say problematic it would become. I think the whole issue with them, like any of these months, specialty months, whatever you wish to call them, they lose value over time. They're really, if you're trying, and that's what I would hope for Black History Month, is to try to incorporate it into curriculums and other long-term actual solutions. Because as a month itself, I think it becomes, again, it becomes trivialized. Whether it should or shouldn't, I think is irrelevant. But I think people, as just the nature of people forget why things exist. People do whatever is currently trendy or cool. That's what people are. So, but I do feel that if you ended it with again, I know it's not going to happen, but I do think it should be more internalized into curriculum as opposed to just Facebook memes.
Sorry, let me get my thoughts together. What do you see of something that's successful of consistently keeping in front of people, keeping a cause or a movement that does it very well year round? Do we do that well with our military? Do we do that well with, besides advertising, because advertising is a consistent down your throat. This is what you need to buy. This is whatever it is. Aside from that, is there something that is a movement or a cause that you think as a country or as a world we do good keeping together? Because outside of church, I don't know if you're a faithful church member. God says, hey, every first day of the week, we get so busy. He's like, every week, you need to come and meet with me, because we get so much in our groove and what we do. But I'm just wondering, in the general public, is there anything that you see that we've done a good job of keeping in the forefront of people's minds?
I'm going to say no, which again sounds incredibly like sad, but I would no. Realistically, I'm like, even you brought up several holidays that should be incredibly important. Veterans Day and Memorial Day. Most people can't tell you the difference between the two. And I think like every year someone has to post like a meme to be like, this one's for this guy, this one's for this guy. And it's like, this should be completely obvious. And it's sad that it's not, because again, they'll spend the entire month calling everyone a hero and they don't even know what the day is for. So like we really don't. I mean,
yeah,
these movements are made to be short term with lasting goals. And right now that's not what we're doing.
Interesting. So I guess, as you kind of so accurately put about people not knowing the difference between the two, is we don't know exactly what the long-term keeping something in front of somebody is. The spiritual perspective would be that it would be obviously the Lord that's going to be able that for when the Holy Spirit of God lives in you, those things he will bring to remembrance, things that he wants, and his providential hand will lead you. As far as a natural world, I guess keeping in front of us at any point would be education. Would that be a safe thing? Because I mean, basically what has the most time that's everybody in the country does would be education, would it not? I mean, what do you think?
Yes, that's exactly what I believe.
So in a natural sense, yes, it'll be education. Mm-hmm. But then I guess we talk education at a different time. But Aaron, what'd you say?
I was saying, what if, and maybe this is just me, right? But what if it's empathy? What if empathy keeps it in front of us? Because what if every time, like if we were actually sensitive to people, so we think about Memorial Day and Veterans Day. If we're actually really sympathetic, the people who are around people who are in the military know the difference. Like, because most of them, I would say, would know the difference if they have a military family member or something going on. But that being close to them and listening to the needs of others helps you keep that in the forefront. And what happens when every movement that comes through, or let's not even say movement, let me back up and just say every situation. So let's just say an Ahmaud Arbery situation comes up. And instead of like trying to prove why it's not racism, we just stop and weep with those who weep. And we look at it. And then we have that moment to keep moving this vehicle. Because as Anton's saying, like I'm really starting to see this as like, what if these events are not like stationary, but they are vehicles to move us to certain places? Like History Month is to move us into certain places. If that it is what it is, to keep it in front of us is we just start listening to people. Like, I may not understand what it is to have a child with special needs, but when I'm around people with children with special needs, I'm not like, number one, judging their child, or, oh man, if it was my child, I'd do this. Or I'm not saying like, or I'd handle it this way. I'm just sitting down and saying, how can I help? I'm here for you. And then all of a sudden I get an education in what it is to have someone who has a different situation than I do. And then as these things keep growing, these are the things that keep us these big issues right in front of us, not just advertising, but actually having relationships and feeling for people and trying to walk alongside of them. But maybe I'm getting
I agree wholeheartedly. I just consider that to be a spiritual issue, because that's where the gospel comes in. The gospel reconciles us vertically to God, that as far as we're undeserving and we can't access him. But then, the gospel reconciles us, but also reconciles us horizontally to each other. And so therefore, how do sinful people live together? It's like sinful people that are consumed with ourselves. We love ourselves and what we want. We will give people a pass to a certain line, but we have an inward line. The only way to be able to then have that care for somebody beyond yourself is going to be the gospel, So I believe you see the gospel power not only just vertically between you and God, between you and man as well, that you're able to truly love your neighbor. And I think there's only going to be a certain line of how far we're going to get as far as loving one another in this case. So, but anyway, with those thoughts being in mind,
can I say one more thing, please?
Oh yeah, sure. Before we quickly the last point.
I'm sorry, just exactly what Aaron said. This is why when we started this podcast, the first thing I said, it's very important to say that we're not a Christian nation, because everything you're saying, and I get the empathy and the love, and what you're describing to me is biblical love, is not going to happen in a social America situation, because America is not a Christian nation. Therefore, again, like I was saying with the police, put protections in place, because we're not a Christian nation. So if your hope, or you're building all of your thoughts on the fact that America is Christian, I think that's a flawed premise. Your expectation should not be that sinners are going to completely change their ways out of nowhere. And that there should be laws and education in place for the benefit of all of us.
I can agree with that. And at this point, I'd be happy if the Christians listening would help us start the
Guys, we were getting some 5-star reviews. We were getting 5-star reviews. Now we just dropped down to like a bunch of 1 stars just for that.
Well, no, because I think that sometimes.
Oh man.
But I'm just saying, like, if we as Christians can start leading the way on this, I know, like, it's a pie in the sky dream, right? But I'm just wondering as I think through, as I'm processing things you're saying, Anton, I'm like, how do you keep these things in front? And I agree, like, we can't expect the Saturday Night Live, or I mean, I guess I shouldn't even, but just like late night television people to all of a sudden be like, hey, let's stop making jokes.
Yeah,
thinking through what it really means to feel this way or to get involved in this situation. Like, no, I'm agreeing with you. But I was just thinking through, at least as believers, because I think there's sometimes we're so blind to what we don't know, or we just believe. Let's back up. Let me say it this way. Like you said that we believe America's Christian nation. Sometimes I think we just believe we're good Christians and that we're doing all these things that we're not doing. That all the things we may believe in our mind, but our actions are not even coming close to matching up to them. And so maybe this is where we have to start it, even as just Christians.
Well, I think this is a time for revival. That's what it's time for, and I know that seems to be a pie in the sky thing too. But when Christians get back to loving God and the abnormal, what we consider to be abnormal Christian life becomes normal of just loving people and doing it, is when you see those things take place. We've gone long, gentlemen. So here's what we're going to do. Instead of tips and tools, what we're going to do is just really quickly share what do we seek to accomplish during this month. No longer than a minute. Everybody go for it. I'll go first. And then everyone kind of just follow through. Aaron, go with you. Then Anton, you end. What do we seek to accomplish during this month? For me, I have put it as educate, inspire, empathy. Those 3 words, because I hope that learning about different individuals that we're going to be bringing up and what we've seen happen in their life, and we're going to do more than just give you the billboard names of people who are in Black history, to which we just went to Wikipedia, read a couple lines, give you some people that we really believe can be able, that we can learn from their lives today. And if they were alive today, what they would be saying. And so, like, I think being altruistic, like, even Martin Luther King mentions just, when you put someone before you. And I think this month, my hope to accomplish is that we would then be able to try our best to put another group of people ahead of ourselves, to be able to think through what could we learn from them. They obviously made great sacrifices, so if they could be able to speak now, what would their sacrifices be saying? So did I say Aaron, Anton? Aaron, right? Go for it.
Either way. I guess my heart would be to start the process, because even as Anton's talking about how these things lead to something else, I guess I would have thought about this in a different way, but I'm seeing what he's saying. I think my heart would be to start the process of learning. So not just, I guess, to cultivate the hunger, to be able to look into people more and to think about this more than just the surface, quick Google search of a person or a situation, and actually stop and think. Because I think this is where we are as a country, right? Like, all we have to do is see a headline and we can write our own stories. Like, we don't need real news. All we do is write. But if we can get to the point where we stop letting other people tell us these like eye-catching like headlines and actually sit down and read the story, or do a little more research, look at another source and look at these things and start to see the big picture. I guess that would be my heart for Black History Month, is that we start looking at the situations that have gone in the past, the ones that are going on now, and kind of putting meat to the bones and having a desire to do that. Like, not just, hey, feed me, tell me, I'll just consume this, to actually get out and study it, understand it, and kind of put the pieces together. So I guess that would be my heart.
Yeah. Anton.
Mine would be just to shift perspective. I think history is seen as a very easy subject. However, I would argue it's probably the most complicated. And I think we get very comfortable looking at history through whatever lens you may see it through. And my goal is to pick, and I'll be real, I would probably pick more controversial figures in the Black community, because I think we sometimes hesitate or run away from people who would cause us to doubt our perspective or our foundation. Even though we know that there is elements of both truth and help that can be found, we are very quick when the voice is from a place that makes us feel uncomfortable to throw the whole thing away and just say they're a crazy person. And so my goal did not to be to get you to agree with, let's say, more controversial figures, but just to at least for a moment look through life in their perspective.
Well, and that was Anton's very soft push for Malcolm X.
But going with this, not trying to start a whole other conversation, because I'm with Anton, because
you're right.
What we're thinking through, like this, and I'm not trying to get political here, but the storming of the Capitol and all the different things that are coming up, and it's like, oh well, what happens when they come and take this, or this happens, and we find the heroes of 1776 so inspiring, right? This is our 1776. But what happens when people who are cast down, beat down, all these things, and then you get a leader like Malcolm X or another controversial person who takes up arms because they are being mistreated, because they're not being represented, but they are the enemy. But when the opposite side, when our heroes of the past took up because they weren't being represented, we're all for that. But then we have to, so I do think these are conversations that we have to sit down and wrestle with. We have to stop and think through what makes Malcolm X so controversial. And I would have some disagreements with him in some things. But what makes him controversial? But whoever in the, whatever of our founding fathers who signed their name to a paper because they weren't being represented well, and would take arms against, because they were not, I mean, those people weren't killing, they weren't killing colonists that I know about. Maybe I need to grow in my history there, but they weren't feeling represented. So they took up arms. But if anybody in history takes up arms, even though they're being beat, lynched, anything else, it's like, whoa, he needs to just submit to his authority.
You are correct. You're trying to introduce a new podcast. This is not part one. This is not part two. This is totally we're just doing this one. So our listeners know that we do not lack content. So as far as going forward about talking about these things, but that's what we hope to accomplish during Black History Month this month. And I hope that you join us every single Friday as we release a new podcast, hopefully highlighting shifting perspective, like Anton was saying, hopefully introduce you to some names and celebrate this time that we have. And so we look forward to you joining us next time.